Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Tzadi Aleph, and we're going to finish today the 5th chapter. Chapter is going to end in an interesting way. We're going to end up on a slew of Agadatot based on this topic that we're going to be talking about right now that we started yesterday about specific things one can't do in Israel. Okay, one, we started with not making profits off of people on basic needs like wine and oil and flour. Now we're going to continue. Tanu Rabbanan. הם מסתכלים בארץ ישראל בדברים שיש בהם חיי נפש, כגון ינות שמנים וסלטות. That's a repeat of what we saw yesterday. Here it comes up in a Braita, that before we had, you can't take these, you can't export them. Now we're going to talk about how you can't make money off of them. What we mean by not making money, well, if you have what, you're not going to sell them. Well, the point is, don't sell to someone who is going to then, don't have a middle person in the deal there where the wholesaler sells to somebody else who then sells in their store to others or like that. No, but the owner should sell directly, and that basically keeps the prices lower. He actually did this with wine and with oil. On what basis? Well, we saw Rabbi Yehuda, it should be Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. We saw this yesterday. He allowed them to do it with wine because, right, to export wine because we want to get rid of it. So they allowed him also to profit off of it because they wanted, right, they didn't want so many people to actually access wine because it led to all sorts of bad behaviors. Beshemen, why oil? Well, there was tons of oil, and therefore there was no concern that if he would profit off of it by being a middle person here, it wouldn't jack up the prices so much for other people. They had plenty of other supply to buy from, and probably it would keep his prices down because how much more could he charge if everyone else is charging less? And because of that, it was permitted. Tanu Rabbanan, another bright. You can't, okay, we're not going to actually be able to translate this just yet, but you can't make money double on eggs. What does it mean, double? Amar Mari Bar Mari. Why his name is the same as his father's name, I don't know, but you can look it up. I didn't have a chance. About Rav Shmuel. So he said that Rav and Shmuel disagree. We don't know who said what. Hanamar, one explained this in this passage, al hadre, means selling one for the price of two, meaning you can't double the price. Okay, this is a little bit strange. What do you mean? Aren't there laws of ona'ah? You can't charge more than 1/6. Of course, you can't charge double. Some will say, well, it was a lot of work involved in transporting eggs, also, I guess, because they're so fragile. So because of that, of course, you can always charge for your labor, but you can't charge up to, so therefore regular laws of ona'ah don't apply because you are allowed to charge more because it's your work and all the effort you make, but you can't get up to more than double. Okay, some people say maybe ona'ah is only in big, expensive things and not on small things. There's a bit of a debate how this relates to laws of ona'ah. Bechad amar tagar letagar, and the other one says, what does it mean pa'amayim? It means you can't sell to the wholesaler can't sell to one person who's then going to sell to another person who's then going to sell it in the shuk. In other words, in the marketplace, you can't have two middle people involved here. Tanu Rabbanan, another Braita, matri'im aplakmatia v'afilu b'Shabbat. If all of a sudden there's a huge price drop and all the let's say there's a lot of Jews in the town that this is their business, and all of a sudden the prices drop. It's like when the market falls and everyone goes crazy. So matri'im al prakmatia, you can start having shofar blows and maybe fasts and other prayers. Specific, you can start having like a communal prayer kind of thing for this kind of thing, even for prices dropping, and even on Shabbat. On Shabbat, generally, we don't have these kind of prayers, and like a big prayer. We have some problem in the community. We don't do it on Shabbat, but for this kind of thing, it's so serious and affects so many people, you can do it. Now we're going to see Amar Rabbi Yochanan. What are some examples? Kigon klei pishtam beBavel, like linen clothing in Babylonia, because a lot of the Jews were linen merchants. Okay, they have like shmata business. V'yayin b'shemen be'eretz Israel, and wine and oil in Israel. Those were the main source of income for people. So if the prices all of a sudden drop, it's going to be a huge problem for the whole community. But Amar of Yosef, what's the amount? Like how much do prices go down? V'hu dizal v'kam asara b'shita. The price for what used to be the price for 6 is now the price for 10. Okay, so that is a big enough change in price, like a 40% decrease, that you can now buy 10 for the price that you could once buy 6. And that's going to cause a huge loss for the store owners. Tanu Rabbanan, ein yotzim me'aretz l'chutz la'aretz. Okay, now we're going to talk about the issue of you can't leave Israel to go abroad. Okay, like let's say it's more expensive to live in Israel. As many of us know, that actually is an issue. So you can't leave Israel to go outside of Israel. Ela im ken amdu sa'atayim b'sela. Well, if the prices are that 2 se'ah cost a sela, which is a lot of money for 2 se'ah, then you can leave. Okay, but any other thing, okay, now we're going to see it's not exactly like as simple as this says, but if the price all of a sudden go up, it becomes really expensive to live in Israel, then you can leave. But less than that, no. So I'm a Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbi Shimon says not so clear. Matai, when does this work? Bisman she'eino motzei likach. It's only if you don't have money to buy the expensive food. But if you have the money to buy it, can't say it's expensive to live in Israel, but you actually can afford it. Okay, obviously it's a big question. What does it mean to afford it, not afford it? But they say if you have the money, then even if it's expensive, you have to stay. And thus said Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Elimelech, and now we're going to get into this. It's going to be a big tangent. We're going to get off on all sorts of drashot of the Ruth story. Megillat Ruth, Elimelech, Machlon v'Chliyon Gdolei Hador Hayu uParnesei Hador Hayu. Okay, they were very wealthy. They were leaders of the people, and they also supported the people. And why did they get punished? They left Israel, and that was their whole problem. Shenemal, as it says, and they had the money, they could afford it, even though it was obviously very expensive. There was a famine, wasn't a lot of food, but there was what to buy, and they had the money to buy it. And that's why they shouldn't have left. How do we know that this is what they were punished for? And we'll see there's 2 different opinions actually about what they did wrong. This is one. Shenemal, well, when Naomi comes back with Ruth, it says there, Vatahom kol ha'ir alehem, the whole city was, heard them. They were coming in, they made a big commotion, V'tomarna, and they said, Hazot Naomi, is this Naomi? My Hazot Naomi, why it say, is this Naomi? Why in that language? And this is where in the world of drashot, we can take a hey and switch it with chet. They're going to basically say it's not Hazot, it's Chaza, okay, which we're going to see is, did you see? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Amru, they said, Chazitem Naomi, did you see Naomi? Sheyatzat me'eretz l'chutz la'aretz, ma'altala. Did you see what happened to Naomi, who left Israel to go abroad and was punished on account of that? But Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, another thing Rabbi Yitzchak says on that same pasuk, why it say the whole city? Well, what was the whole city doing out at that time that they all saw her come in? Oto yom Shabbat Ruth HaMoabiyah le'eretz Yisrael meta ishto shel Boaz. So this is going to explain 2 things. First, it's going to explain why they were all out, because they were all at the funeral for the wife of Boaz. She had died specifically on that day. And another thing that we get from this is Hainu Damri Nashe. This is what people say, Adelo Shachiv Shichva Kaima Mino Beite. Before the person dies, already the replacement is there. Okay, so here you have his wife died, and already Ruth was on her way into town, ready like the remedy to the problem. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna Amar Rav. So Rabba bar Rav Huna says in the name of Rav, Ifsan ze Boaz. Okay, there's a shofet, one of the judges in the book of Judges is called Ifsan. He comes up in chapter 12, and it doesn't say much about him, but one of the things we see, we're going to see this right now, my Kamashal, and what does it teach you? Why do we want to say that Ifsan is Boaz? I'm not going to exactly have a great explanation, but they're going to say something about Boaz, something negative actually. Ki after Rabba bar Rav Huna, this is to teach you something else that Rabba bar Rav Huna said. The Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna Amar Rav, also said in the name of Rav. 120 shta'ot asa Boaz lebanav. Boaz made 120 parties for his children. Shene'emal, as it says, okay, and this was said about Ivtzan, but they want to say this was Boaz. Vayihi lo 30 banim u30 banot. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. Shilach hachutza, right? 30 banot shilach hachutza, and the 30 daughters he sent abroad. The sons he kept home. 30 banot hevi lebanav mibachutz, and he brought 30 daughters-in-law basically from abroad or from somewhere for his sons. Vayishpot et Yisrael 7 shanim, and he was the judge for 7 years. Okay, that's the pasuk. Vayilo 30 banim u 30 banot shilach hachutza. That's all it says about Ivtzan. Okay, and then he rules the people for 7 years. So that's the pasuk, and they're basically saying this is about Boaz. It said 120 parties he made for them. B'chol echat ve'echat asa shnei mishtaot. Here we get the drasha about the mishtaot, the parties. For each of those 60 children, he made 2 parties. Echad bebeit aviv, echad bebeit chaniv. One in the father's house, one in the father-in-law's house. Okay, some people say this is an engagement party and a wedding. Some people say it's when they were born and when they got married. Ubekulan lo zimen Manoach. Now here is Boaz's what he did wrong. He didn't invite Manoach. Amal kudana akara b'mai parali. He said, well, he doesn't have any children. Remember, Manoach is the father of Shimshon, but first his wife is Akara. They can't have children. So what happened? Well, he said, I'm not going to invite him to my parties because he won't be able to invite me back because I have so many children. He doesn't have any. Tana, and the Braita says, Kulam metu b'chayav. All of them died in his lifetime. Okay, that was his punishment for this. V'hainu de'amrei nashe, and this is what people say, b'chayayich yaladet shitin, shitin lamalech. You're going to have in your life 60 kids. What's the point? Okay, the main point of this line is going to be, it's quality versus quantity. Okay, you could have 60 kids. What does it all matter? But in the end, make an effort and have one that's better than all 60. And either what this is saying is, he was kind of pointing fingers at Manoach, oh, you don't have any children, I'm not going to invite you. And in the end, Manoach had one child who became a hero to the Jewish people. He was a bit of a complicated hero, but Shimshon, who became a hero, and that was all greater than Boaz's children. Some people say, what do you mean? Boaz gave birth to David. And what this is talking about is he had all these 60 children, but it was only later that he had this one child, David, who became the leader. And all of his other 60 all died before their time, and then nothing came of it. And again, it was, number one, right, his punishment was for the parties and what he said about Manoach. Again, that's all the drasha. And the point is, though, in the end, he had David, who was one, and it's all about, how you raise your children, I guess, and on what values, and that's what's important, to have, one child who's amazing rather than many, many children. Obviously, it's interesting. So there's sugyot that talking about the importance of having a lot of children, but this is saying, it's not just about having children, it's about how you raise them. Okay, so again, why they wanted to say Ibsan is Boaz was to get to this whole thing about Boaz. It's a bit of a critique on Boaz, even though we usually think of Boaz as a strong character. Why they want to bring him down, I'm not really sure. Siman, here's a siman for the next section. Melech Abraham, 10 shanim sheniftar, nitnaseh levado. Amar Rav Chanan, again, we don't pay too much attention to these simanim in our learning, but you can write, you'll see in the next sections what these are references to. Amar Rav Chanan barava amarav, Elimelech, v'Salmon, uploni Almoni, va'avi Naomi, kulam b'nei Nachshon ben Aminadav. It is connected between all these people. Perhaps they're all people who help bring about David's rise to power. Elimelech, not that he was so directly involved in this whole thing. Salmon, who was the father of Boaz. Ploni Almoni, who basically redeemed, right, says, he does the whole chalitza thing, and I'm not going to marry Ruth, and frees her up to marry Boaz. And the father of Naomi, who obviously Naomi was very instrumental in making things happen. They were all the sons of Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was the first one to jump into the water, according to the Midrash, was a very strong character, is always for the Tov. My Kamash, what's this coming to teach you? Well, they're actually using it for something else, which is to talk about Elimelech, who was killed. And what do we see? What Elimelech did was so bad by leaving Israel that he was punished, even though he had zchut avot, even though Nachshon ben Aminadav is great, and theoretically his merits should have stood up for Elimelech, but it didn't, because what he did was so terrible. Amarav Chanan barav Amarav, Ime da Avraham Amtilai bat Karnavo. This is an interesting section. We're talking about who was the mother of Avraham. His mother's name was Amtilai, this daughter of Karnavo. Okay, obviously this doesn't appear in the Tanakh. And Ime da Haman Amtilai bat Orevti. And the mother of Haman, actually her first name was the same as the mother of Abraham, was the daughter of Orevti. Right, she was Amtilai, the daughter of Orevti. Simanech, how do you remember which is which? Tameh, tameh, tahol, tahol. The orev is a non-kosher bird, and therefore Haman was the non-kosher one, the tameh one, the impure one, and that's why that's how you remember his was the one, the daughter of Orevti, and Abraham was his mother was the daughter of Carnival. I would say Carnival with a cup, but with a kuf, it's actually a kosher bird, and that's what this reference to. Some people have a bit of a different drashan, what the tahor is, but we'll leave it at that. Ime de David, the mother of David, and perhaps this is why we're on this, because we were talking about David, or Ruth, who ended up giving birth to David, and the whole story which led to his birth. Nitzevet bat ad Elshama, that was her name. Ime de Shimshon, we also may mention him before in the Manoach, but in the end, he does have a son, Shimshon, and his mother's name is Slelponit, and Achte, his sister, is Nashian. So the Gemara asked the obvious question, which you'll be surprised by the answer, but L'mainaf Gemina, why are you telling us this? Why do we need to know all these mothers' names? Litshuvata minim, because the minim, the heretics, when they come and ask and say, hey, your Torah doesn't mention the women, maybe they were feminists, I don't know, but also some of the commentators say, well, we know Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, we have a lot in the Kings, by the way, they mentioned a lot of the mothers' names, but by these people, it's not mentioned. And remember by Shimshon, she's called Eshet Manoach. She doesn't have a name. It's always a very strange thing. He's Manoach and she's the wife of Manoach, even though she's more the heroine in the story, or the stronger character. But anyway, it's so that if the minim come and somehow have something to say, you don't know the women's names, or some people say it's against the tradition, that we don't have an oral tradition that fills in the gaps, but here we do. Here are the names. But Amarav Chanan Barav Amarav, another thing that he said. How did we get to all this, by the way? They're not exactly connected. I mean, we did talk about David, but these are all statements of Rav Hanan bar Rava in the name of Rav. Okay, so that was the Siman was for all these things. Melech, Abraham, okay, which was the mother, and Eser Shanim. We're going to get to these things right now. So, Amar Rav Hanan bar Rava, Amar Rav, Eser Shanim nechbash Abraham Avinu. For 10 years, he was taken captive. Shalosh Bakuta Sheva Bakardu Ravdimi Minhardi Amatni Ibcha. He says it was the opposite. It was 7 in Kuta and 3 in Kardo. Okay, what was he taken captive for? So the Rashbam says either Chavasho Nimrod captured him, or in the Agadah Sheshoalim Lanu Uba Agadah Ra'iti Diterach Aviv Chavasho B'Shpil Shayam Ma'abed Slamat. His father took him captive after he broke down the idols of his father, in the famous midrash about that. He broke his father's idols, so his father captured him. So unclear, somebody put him into captivity. And then they say Amar Rav Chisda, just as an aside, Ivra Ze'era Dekuta Zeu or Kastim. Okay, this area called the Ivra Ze'era of Kuta. That's Or Kastim. Why do you need to know this? So the Rashbam says it's because there a miracle happened to Avram, because he was saved in Or Kastim from a fire. That was when he was taken captive. He was thrown into the fiery furnace and was saved. And you're supposed to make a bracha in a place where a miracle happened to your fathers. The next statement. Otoyom sheniftar Avraham Avinu. That was the Siman Niftal. Mina Olam Amdu Kol Gdulei Ha'umot B'Shura V'Amru. Everyone recognized his greatness. All the great leaders of the generation of the different nations said, "Oilo la'olam she'avad b'nigo." Woe is to the world who lost their leader. V'oilo l'sfina she'abad karbanita. And oilo to the boat who lost its captain. Okay, that he was considered both. Okay, you can think about what the differences are between these, but one is, a manhig, maybe like a ruchani, a spiritual leader, and also a political leader. Okay, he also was like running a ship. Last rasha for this section of Rav Hanan bar Rav Amarav. Okay, this is in our davening Varech David, but it comes up it's a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, because that whole section is taken from there. Afilu reish garguta mishmaya mukminama. Means that God basically is above every ruler, every leader, and even the person in charge of giving out the water from the well, that was actually, he was put in place by God. Okay, the leaders, even, right, God is very involved in making sure that things happen. And this is really the theme. I'll already kind of preface it, the theme of what today's daf is all about, and particularly the next section, about how, and it's a very important message for the complicated times that we're living through right now, which is that even though we don't always see it, right, but God is behind everything. Okay, it's a struggle. It's a struggle in our daily lives to understand what's going on right now, and how are things working. But this is really what it's all about, is that God is behind it. And perhaps I'll already kind of preface what we're going to talk about, has to do with leaving Israel, right? When there's a famine, there's rough times, right? Like Elimelech and Machlon and Chilion, right? Without having the full perspective, right? So they say, oh, things are bad, let's leave. Or not understanding. It's like we read about a few weeks ago on Parshat Ekev about, I was thinking, why did they come up here? Because we're talking about selling and buying, and people who sell and buy have wealth and they can afford things. And it's like what the Torah talks about. Don't think that when things are good and you have wealth and you have things growing properly, don't think that I am behind all of this. But no, it's God who's behind all of this, right? He's the one who's oseh chayil. He's the one who helps you in your successes. And in this chapter, we're talking all about the sales and the buying and the this. And don't forget that there's God in the picture, and that God is making things happen. We're going to see this also with the Ruth story, and the whole rise of David to become king is also, right, starting way back from the beginning of Lot and Lot's daughters, right? They gave birth to Moab, right, one of the daughters, which led to Ruth, which led to David, right? You might find God in the most, and maybe this is the most important message for us, in the most unexpected places where it doesn't look like God is involved, but really God is really making all those things happen and has a grand plan, which is always hard to, or sometimes harder than other times to see. So Rav Chia bar Avad Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha Chas v'Shalom. Here comes the second approach of Elimelech and Machlon and Chilion. Now they left Israel, and we said it was because they shouldn't have left Israel. That's why they were punished. He says, Chas v'Shalom, of course not. They were good people. They never would have left. Even if they had found bran, which is like the worst of the food, they never would have left. So then if they left because they really had nothing to eat, why were they punished? They were leaders, and they should have asked for mercy for their people, and they didn't. How do we know that they could have asked for mercy, and because of that they were punished? Or how do we know really they could have asked and it would have worked? When you cry out, the one, there's different interpretations, kibbutzayich, but we'll go with one, which is the Rashbam, the one who's mikabetz, the one who can do the ingathering of the exiles, he will yatzilu, he will save you. So in other words, call out to God and you'll be saved. And they didn't do that, and because of that, they were punished. Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So now we have another statement. Rabbi Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, this whole thing about not leaving Israel, okay, going back to that, Lo shanu ela ma'od bizol uperot biyoker. That's only if money is easy to access. Even if fruits are expensive, money is easy to access, well, then you have to spend the money and not leave the country. But if it's very hard to get money, even if the prices are cheap, that you could buy 4 se'ah for a selah, you can still leave if you don't have the money. And it doesn't matter if prices are cheap. If you can't afford it because you don't have money to pay for it, well, then you can leave. Now we have a siman for 5 statements for Rabbi Yochanan, which are a little bit unrelated, or some of them they kind of break up into categories, but they all have the same wording in them. And because of that, they're all strung together here. The siman for them to remember the 5 is Sela, Poel, Charuva, Talia, Be'an, Molim. Here goes the first one. Da'amar Rabbi Yochanan, Nihirna, Kadhavukaim and Arba Se'im Besela. Now, they all start like this. Nihirna, I remember when the following thing happened, that you could buy 4 se'ah for a selah, and yet, even though prices were cheap, there were people who were bloated in their stomach out of malnutrition, midalate isar, because they didn't even have an isar to pay for the food. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan, second statement. Nihirna, po'ala lemidnach karta. I remember when people weren't willing to work in the east side of the city. These were very poor people who had no food. They couldn't even afford bread. Mereach pita maitinan, and they would die because they would smell, and they would want to work on the east side of the city because the wind would come from the west, and the smell of the bread, of the pito baking on the west, where people did have money, was wafting over to them, and they were dying from that smell because they were so hungry. So people wouldn't work there. Again, those 2 statements go together because they're both describing a time when there was a terrible, terrible famine, or people had no food to eat, or poverty. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan, second set of statements. This is the third, though, of his statements. Here's talking about when things were, when produce was amazingly rich. Okay, we're going to see what kind of stuff. So the first is about charuvim, is about carob, where it was so when someone would crack open a carob, there would be honey flowing down his arms. Okay, a child they were talking about, and droi is ro'o, Dalet and Zion switch. Daroi is the honey would be dripping from the carob down his arms. But Amar Rabbi Elazar, okay, here's a second statement about the richness of the food or the deliciousness of how amazing the food was, but it's not Rabbi Yochanan. We have 5 statements for Rabbi Yochanan. This is an added statement, not of Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabbi Elazar. Amar Rabbi Elazar, and then we'll get back to the last 2 of Rabbi Yochanan. Nihir nekarav natil orva bisra. Remember when the days when a raven, we're back to the raven we talked about before, when with Haman's mother's name, where a raven would pick up a piece of meat, and a big thing of fat would come dripping down from the top of it. It was so much fat, it was so moist inside, so much fat that the fat would come dripping from the top of the wall to the floor. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, fourth statement of Rabbi Yochanan. I remember when the days when you would see a young girl and a young boy walking in the shuk, the shuka, they'd be 16 or 17, and they wouldn't sin. Okay, they were, nice, like what do you call it? A nice relationship with them without having any sinning involved, right? This is like remember when. Okay, so the first statements were remember when there were terrible times, and then this is remembering when there were good times. For Amar Rabbi Yochanan, last statement is totally different than the others, but again, the same language. I remember when they would say in the Beit Midrash, if you agree with the Gentiles about their things they say, you're going to fall into their hands. They're going to conquer you. Like, don't think you can assimilate basically and, get away with it. No, they're going to end up taking over. And if you expose yourself to them, mitrachitz really means to bathe with them, which usually, I assume the idea of exposing comes from, undressing. If you expose yourselves to them, then delay dilhon, your stuff will become their stuff. They'll take advantage of that. Okay. Those were 5 statements of Rabbi Yochanan that we got to because we were talking about famine and leaving Israel. Back to Machlon and Chilyon. So Ktiv, Machlon, and Chilyon, these were the 2 sons of Elimelech who were married to Ruth and Orpah, and they also die, right? They left town and then they die, and Elimelech dies in the story of Ruth. Uchtiv, Yoash, v'Saraf. Now there's a different pasuk in Divrei Yamim, Chronicles, number 1, chapter 4, where it talks about Yoav and Saraf. It actually lists people from the tribe of Judah, although there's a bit of a problem with, we'll see the drasha in this pasuk. Anyway, Rav Shmuel Chadamar Machlon v'Chilyon Shman. So they say these are really Machlon and Chilyon. The question is, what were their real names and what were their fake names? Okay, what does it mean fake names? Well, often in Tanakh, people are given names so that you can darshan them and come up with a drasha about them. So when you have people with 2 different names, the question is, what's their real name and what's their name meant for drashot? So there's a debate between Rav and Shmuel about this. One says Machlon and Chilyon were their real names. V'lama nikra shman Yoash shenityashu min hageula. Okay, sorry. Now in the Quran, Shman Saraf Yoash shenityashu min hageula. Saraf shenitchayvu sreifa lemakom. Yoash, because they gave up. Okay, Yoash from Yeush, giving up. They gave up from redemption. They said, "Oh, God's not going to redeem us," and they just left town. Right. This is why the whole idea is about realizing that God is there and don't just give up on God. Leaving Israel when things are tough, or basically saying, "Oh, we give up on God." Saraf shenitchayvu sreifa lemakom. Well, they were punished by God. Said you deserve to be burned for what you did. So one is what they did, and the other name is about what happened to them. And the same thing is going to be with a different drasha we'll get to later, but the one we're going to get to right now, actually, which is also darshaning. One is kind of what they did, and the other is what happened to them. So Chadamar, the other one said Yoash v'Saraf Shman. Those are their real names. Lama nikra Shman Machlon v'Chilyon. So why were they called Machlon and Chilyon? Machlon shnasu gufa chulin. They made their bodies not sacred by leaving Israel, right, and going to Chul, Chutz La'aretz, right, like outside of Israel, Chul. V'chilyon shenitchayvu klaya l'makom, and chilyon again is what happened to them. Well, God just said you're going to be wiped out. Tanya command Amar Machlon v'chilyon Shma. Now we're going to have a brighta that says that Machlon and Chilyon were the real names, and the drasha was on Yoash and Saraf. How do we know this? Tanya, my dechtiv, and here we're going to darshan the whole pasuk. Here comes the pasuk in Divrei Yamim. Yokim v'anshe koziva v'Yoash v'Saraf asher ba'alu l'Moav v'yashuv lechem v'advarim atikim. Hard pasuk to really understand. Again, this was listing people from the Davidic family. The Yokim ze Yoshua, shekim shvu'al anshe Givon. Why is he called Yokim? Because he kept his promise to the people of the Givonim. If you remember, they dressed up as if they were from far away, but they were really from the 7 nations, one of the 7 nations, and he ends up having to keep his promise to them, which is he made a pact with them, which he wasn't allowed to do, but he did because he didn't realize they were from nearby, and that's why he's called Yokim. He's not, though, from Shevet David, so people say his mother. Rashbam explains his mother must have been from Shevet David. V'anshe Kozeva elu anshe Givon shekizvu b'Yoshua. And the people of Koziba are the people of Givon that went against Yoshua. Okay, they're clearly not from Shevet David. Okay, what this is, why they're mentioned here is a good question. Right, the Rashbam just points out they're clearly not from Shevet Yehuda because they're not Jewish at all. The Yoash v'Saraf, he doesn't explain why they're in this pasuk. Yoash v'Saraf elu machlon v'chilyon v'lama nikashman Yoash v'Saraf. So why, here you have it. This was the bright we were bringing to prove that Yoash and Saraf are their drasha names. Yoash shenitiyashu min ha'geula, Saraf shenitchayvu shrefah l'makom. This is what we saw exactly before, right? That Yoash, they gave up on the redemption, and Saraf, they were punished, right? They deserved to be burned by God. Asher ba'alu l'Moav, what does that mean? Well, shenasu nashim Moaviyot, because they married Moabite women. V'yashuvi lechem, zol ruta Moaviyah, right? The yashuvi lechem has to do with Beit Lechem. Sheshava v'nidbeka beBeit Lechem Yehuda. Yashuvi lechem is, right, the nashim, the ba'alu Moaviyot, which is ruta Moaviyah, yashuvi lechem, that she went back and stuck with Beit Lechem Yehuda, even though she wasn't Jewish to begin with, right? She stuck with them. V'hadvarim atikim, here's the big line. What does it mean, Hadvarim Atikim? These are old. Well, Dvarim Halalu Atik Yomaya Amaran. These things were said by the one who lived from a long time ago, which is a reference to God. Dichtiv, in other words, this whole thing was all predetermined by God. This is the way things were going to go about. Dichtiv, Matzati David Avdi, Uchtiv Shtei Benotayach Hanimtzaot. It is a drasha. Matzati David Avdi, as if like I found, came from nowhere. But the same root is used for the daughters of Lot. Shtei benotayach hanimtzaot. Your 2 daughters that are nimtzaot. So what do we see here? That the daughters of Lot were the ones basically caused Moab to be born, which, right, one of them anyway. And that all was predetermined from God. And there you see the connection in the words in the pasuk to connect between David and the Benot Lot, and that it was all basically determined by God that this is how things were going to come about. This is how things were going to work, and this is how David was going to be born. And like I said, it's the most unexpected places, right? Where here it was sin with Lot and his daughters, right? They tricked him into sleeping with him, and so that's how David came about. So God kind of works in mysterious ways, as we say, and unclear ways where you don't always see the whole picture. The next pasuk is Hema Yotzrim Yoshvei Niteim Ugdera Im HaMelech B'Melachto Yashvu Sham. Okay, also a difficult pasuk to really understand. Hema Yotzrim. What are the Yotzrim? These are the people who create things, but what they really mean here is to reference to Ele B'nei Yonadav ben Rechav. These are the sons of Yonadav ben Rechav. Shenatzru Shvuat Avihem. His father had made an oath that comes up in a different section. The Rashbam mentions it also that. Where is it that Shelo Lishtot Yayin V'lo Livnot Batim K'dichtiv b'Yirmiyahu? It's mentioned in Yirmiyahu. They said, well, he said the destruction is going to come. This is actually a long time before the destruction, but he said there's going to be ultimately destruction. You shouldn't drink wine and you shouldn't build houses on account of the future destruction. And they kept their father's promise, Yotzir, instead of created, from linsol. Linsol is to observe. They observe the shvuah, the oath that their father made. So they're the Yotzrim, Yoshvei Nita'im. This is Shlomo, Shedome LeNiti'ah b'malchuto. He was like a little plant, a sapling that grew and grew with the kingship. Ugdera. What's the Gedera? Zos Sanhedrin, Shegadru Pirtzotein Shel Yisrael. They basically closed in all the breaches, right? They made all these fences to basically protect the people from sinning. Im HaMelech b'melachto yeshvu sham. Who's the one who, now here you get to, we're going to go back to Ruth. She sat with the king in his work. Zo Ruth HaMoaviyah, shera'ata b'malchut Shlomo ben beno shel ben bena. Okay, she saw in the future that Shlomo was going to be born, the grandson of her grandchild. Shenemar vayasim kisei le'em HaMelech. There's a different pasuk. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, who you put it. This is actually by Bathsheba, where when Adoniah comes to rebel at the end of David's life, and Bathsheba says, what happened to Shlomo? He was supposed to be king. Vayasim kisei le'em HaMelech. It says there, they put a chair for the mother of the king, which you think is Bathsheba, but Rabbi Elazar says, Li'ima shel Malchut. It was for the mother of the Malchut, that she kind of sat in a chair with God and helped these events to come about. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, now we're going to end with some sections about and this is going to be connected with the miraculousness of God. And if we go back to Parshat Ekev that I was mentioning, about when you get to the land and there's fruits and plenty and everything's good, just remember that God made this all happen. So these aren't the psukim from there, but in Vayikra Kapeh, it talks about the Shemitah year and how you're going to plant in the Zeratem et Hashana Shmini Bachatem Min Hatvua Yashan Ad Hashana She'it. Now that you're not going to plant in the 7th year, so what are you going to eat in the 8th year? Well, you're going to eat the old stuff in the 8th year until the stuff grows in the 9th year. So Achatem Min Hatvua Yashan, you're going to eat the old stuff. What does this mean? Below Salamanton. It's not going to be ruined by Salamanton. What is the Salamanton? My below Salamanton. Rav Nachman Amar below Ritzinta. Rav Sheshan Amar below Shedifa. Okay, Rav Nachman said it was without these worms that would eat the old stuff. Usually, things get worm infested over time and ruined. Rav Sheshet says without Shedifa, that's without blight, which is that, they dry out. Okay, so 2 different types of things that could happen to it. Each one says that's what the Salamanton is. There's a debate. Tanya Kavatei Rav Sheshet, Tanya Kavatei Rav Nachman. We're going to have a bright to support each one. Tanya Kavatei Rav Nachman, V'achaten Yashan. You're going to eat the old. Okay, it's the same pasuk. Yachol Yisrael mitzapim lechadash mipnei yashan shekala. You might have thought you're going to wait for the new once the old is already destroyed. Why would it be destroyed? Because of the worms. Okay, that's destruction. Talmud Lomar abot fuata. Okay, it says no. Don't think you're gonna not have old and you're gonna have to wait for the new. No, the old is only going to be finished once abot fuata. Once the new comes out, you'll still have the old and it won't be destroyed by these worms. So that's the bright that supports Rav Nachman. The next one, Tanya Kavatei de Rav Sheshet, right? Abot fuata ad shtavot fuata me'ela. Until the new grains grow already, only then will you not have any old ones left. That's the miraculousness of this. Tanya Kavatei de Rav Sheshet, the bright supporting Rav Sheshet, v'chaltem en hatvua yashan. Yachol yu Yisrael mitzapin lecha. It's the same psukim, but now a different drasha that's going to support the one about the blight. Yachol yu Yisrael mitzapin lechadash mipnei yashan shera. You might have thought that you'll have to wait for the new because the old is right. Once the old is already bad, why bad? Bad because it dries out. Then you'll have to wait for the old. You'll have to wait for the new. There'll be this gap of time. It's the same kind of concept. It's just instead of kala, destroyed because it's eaten up, this is ra, it turns bad because of the blight. Try it out. Talmud Lomar abot fuata. Again, the drasha ends with, because it says abot fuata, meaning you will still have the old until the new one grows. Ad shtavot fuah me'ela, you'll still have the old. That will be the miraculous nature of it. Tanu Rabanan va'achatem yashan noshan. Okay, another drasha is psukim, and you will eat the yashan noshan. Okay, this is actually a different pasuk. This is in the section, the next parak in chapter 26 of Vayikra. It talks about first the blessings, and then it gets to the curses, the bad things that will happen to you if you don't follow God. So in the good part, it says, V'achaltem yashan noshan, you will eat yashan noshan. Now it's the same root said twice, right? The old. Okay, this again talks about the glory of Israel, that the land of Israel, that the produce there, the older it gets, the more it's aged, the better it is. Okay, we know that's true with some things, not everything. Well, they're going to say here, So I get like wine gets better with age, but how do we know that things that generally they're not better aged, specifically in Israel, they'll be better when they age? That's again miraculous nature of things. Talmud Lomar Yashan Noshan. The double language teaches you Mikom Makom. Everything is going to be better when it ages. Yashan Mipnei Chadash Totziu. What does that mean? Melamed Shayu Otzarot Meleim Yashan. You'll take out the old because of the new. What does that mean? Well, you'll have storage houses full of old produce. There'll be so much produce you'll be able to store up and have them totally full. Ugranot le'ot chadash, and your threshing floors will be full of new, and you'll want to put it in the storage houses, and there won't even be room. By Yisrael, they'll be so overwhelmed by so much produce. They're going to say, "How are we going to take out the old to make room for the new?" Okay, in terms of again, there's just going to be so much plenty here. Amar Rav Papa, last line, Kol mile atika ma'alya levar mitamre v'shichur v'harsana. Everything in Israel is better as it ages, except for three things: dates, beer, and this harsana fish. It was a fish that they would fry. And with that, Hadran alach hamocheret hasfina. Finish the chapter hamocheret hasfina. So, like I said before, the chapter's ending, and perhaps because it was all about selling and buying and people with wealth, obviously, if they're selling and buying. But what it's trying to say here is don't get overwhelmed by the wealth and think that this is all you. But remember that God is behind everything. God is behind the David HaMelech. And in fact, he became a great king and Shlomo and the whole Mechupei David, right? God basically made sure that that happened. And in a way that was kind of the unexpected to show you that when things are looking bad, just understand that there's a bigger picture out there. Okay, and we talked about not leaving Israel, even when things are tough, right? All these messages ring very strongly today. Here they weren't talking about tough in terms of security issues. They were talking more about financial issues, but obviously they're interconnected. And understanding that there's a grand plan behind all of this. And with that, we'll finish our daf, wishing everyone a good day and Besarot Tovot.